Hey guys, ChrisFix here, and today I'm going to show you how to fix your loose, sloppy, wet noodle of a shifter. That right there is not neutral. That way, after you're done watching this video, you'll be able to get some nice, direct, crisp shifts. And I'm going to show you how to repair a leaking transmission, which has leaked all over my once clean driveway. Put a catch pan under here after I figured it out, and you can see it is leaking a lot. So I'm going to show you how to replace the transmission seal to fix that. That way our driveway stays clean. So let's get started. Now in this car and many high mileage cars, your shifter might feel a little loose and indirect. This right here is neutral. If we go into first, look at how much play there is. Even if I lightly move side to side, there is a ton of play, and that's in every gear. There's fourth, there's fifth, oh, there's fifth. You can see what I'm talking about. It is very sloppy, and because it's so sloppy, it's hard to get into every gear and know that you're in the correct gear. So I'm gonna show you how to fix all this sloppiness. And so we could get an accurate before and after, let's get into fourth gear. And now we could use a tape measure to measure from one side of the play to the other side of the play. And we have about 3 inches or just under 8 centimeters of play, which is a lot of play. And no wonder this car feels so bad to drive. So let's go under the car and I can show you why there's so much play in the shifter. So let's get the car up on ramps and then chock off the wheels. And now we're gonna lift the rear of the car with the jack. And I like to use a rubber jack pad so I don't damage anything. So lift the car up until she's level, like that. And then get your jack stands under the car, already set up the other jack stand on the other side. And now we could slowly drop the car onto the jack stands, like that. Beautiful. And I also like to raise the jack up so it's lightly touching the frame, just as backup. So with the car lifted up, now I like to give it a good shake to make sure it doesn't budge, and that is solid, so now let's go underneath. Alright, so that way is the front of the car. The oil pan is right here. This is the exhaust, and then we have our transmission. And if you take a look, you can see this is leaking pretty good over here. So we're gonna replace the seal to fix this. Now these right here are the transmission shift linkages. This connects the transmission to the shifter. So if we follow these long shift linkage rods all the way to the middle of the car, right over here, it brings us to our shifter. So this is neutral, first gear, second gear, and as I rode through the gears, look at how much play there is. This is because the bushings are old and dry rotted and because of all this rust. And you can see here, this bracket is completely rusted away. This is what the bracket should look like. And without it, you can see how much play there is. And I'm not even pulling hard. So we're gonna replace that bracket and we're gonna replace the rubber shifter bushing with this poly bushing, and that should help tremendously. Also, all this rust is definitely not good. So I'm gonna show you how to go from this to this. That way you can fix any rust on your car as well. And here's all the tools and products you need to get this job done. As always, we're using common hand tools, and you can't forget about your safety glasses. Product-wise, we have some thread locker, we have a new transmission seal, a new shifter boot because ours is all torn up, and we're gonna be using Honda manual transmission fluid, which is very important. I'll explain more later. We're also going to be installing brand new polyurethane bushings and a new shifter seat, and this is also very important. And to show you why, here is an OEM rubber bushing and here is an aftermarket polyurethane bushing. The rubber bushing has a lot of give, a lot of play. You could easily bend this, and that is going to make your shifts not feel as direct. Now, a polyurethane bushing is a lot harder. It does not bend as easy, so you're going to get more direct, crisp shifts. And the last important part to get good crisp shifts is our shifter. We're gonna be installing this short throw shifter. Now, I do have a really nice spherical bearing, fully adjustable short throw shifter, but this shifter costs more than I paid for this car. And the whole point of this build is for it to be budget friendly. It's so that you guys could replicate this in your driveway and not spend a ton of money. So as much as I'd love to install this, I'm gonna show you we could get amazing results with a more budget friendly shifter. And then finally, you saw all the rust. I'm gonna show you how to remove that rust and encapsulate it with a special spray paint, which means you either need a wire wheel on a grinder or you could use a metal wire brush like this. So that's all the tools and products you're gonna need to get this job done properly. I'll be sure to link everything in the description so you could easily find it. And with that said, let's get started. And the first thing we want to do is start inside the car because we want to remove the plastic trim around the shifter. Now, normally there is a screw right there as well as the other side. If we move the seat back, you can see there is another screw hole there with the screw missing. The screws are missing in this because if you guys remember, last year I had to deal with my first hurricane and this car was flooded a little bit. The carpets were really wet, so I removed all the plastic pieces and seats and stuff. That way I could get it nice and dry. So the only screw holding in the plastic right now is right there. So remove the screw using a Phillips head screwdriver. Then we can remove the back part of the center console by carefully lifting it out. Good. Then we could unscrew the shift knob all the way and remove it. That way we could get the front part of the center console out. Actually, we do have some wires here that need to be disconnected. This goes to our kill switch, so let's disconnect those wires. And if you guys want to see how to install a kill switch in your car, I'll link that video in the description for you. Good, and with the kill switch disconnected, now the center console could come out, and then this rubber boot could be removed, and this just keeps the road noise out of the cabin. And there's one last rubber boot right here that is, again, designed to keep the noise and hot and cold air from coming into the cabin. And if we just tuck this in like that, we want to tuck it under here, that way it doesn't get all caught up when we remove this. So now we are ready to go. Let's go under the car and loosen this up. Now under the car, you can see our shifter is right here, and it's actually only held in by 2 bolts. There's one right there and one right there. Now these bolts are really rusty. I'm hoping they don't snap, so I'm gonna be careful here. If I start to feel like it's gonna snap, I'll use some heat. Okay, beautiful, and I thought we were gonna have a problem with these. Now I was a little nervous about this bolt because of how rusty it was, but you could see there is still some of that zinc coating on the threads. It's just this part that was all rusty, so it came out pretty easily. Now let's hope that the other bolt comes out as easily. All right, 2 for 2. I should probably go play lotto. Now with this bolt coming out, the shifter is loose and will drop down, and that's all there is to it. Now with the shifter removed, let's follow the shift linkage towards the front of the car, and this will lead us to the back of the transmission right here. And then at the transmission, this shift linkage mounts to the transmission. It's just bolted to it. It doesn't move, it provides support. Now this shift linkage is what moves when you change gears. So we want to pull this all the way out, like that, and then slide the rubber boot back, and then that reveals the retaining clip that we need to remove. And the easiest way to remove it is to spin it around so you can see the ends of the clip. Then we could use a small pry bar to get under the clip, and get ready because this is probably going to go flying. Okay, so it went flying, but we got it off. And this retaining clip is designed to prevent the pin from coming out, because if it comes out, your shifter's gonna stop working. Now this pin is officially called a spring pin, but it has a much less friendly name on the streets because of how difficult it is to remove. But don't worry, I'm gonna show you a trick to remove it easily, and the trick is using a 7mm diameter punch like this. This punch fits perfectly on the outer edge of the spring pin. Don't use a screwdriver or anything like that that fits on the inside, because that's gonna force the pin to open up more and make it even harder to remove. So be sure to use a 7mm punch, get it centered right on the spring pin just like that, and then use a big hammer, something like a 5-pound hammer, and just hammer it away. Now don't let this scare you. This is super easy to do, and it should take less than a minute, and you can see the pin is moving already. Perfect, and that's what the spring pin looks like. Now with the pin removed, the shifter should slide right off the transmission, just like that, and then we could remove the dust boot, and that uncovers our leaking shift seal. So this is the shifter shaft, which selects which gear you're in, and there is some corrosion at the base of the shaft, which is probably what wore down the seal and damaged it, because this rod moves back and forth every time you change gear. So we're gonna have to sand down the corrosion to make it smooth and then replace the seal, but before we do that, let's remove the other shift linkage. So get a wrench on the bolt and break it free, and then we could remove this bolt completely so the linkage could be removed. And finally, the whole shifter assembly is disconnected from the car, so let's remove it from under the car, being careful not to hit anything, and let's get this thing out of our way. With that out of the way, next let's remove the mount right here at the transmission. You technically don't have to remove this, but it's very rusty. I want to sand it down and paint it. Plus it does give me just a little bit more room to work down here since it's pretty tight. So just get this last bolt out, and this could be removed. So with the bracket removed, let's replace this leaking transmission shift seal. Here's what the seal looks like. It goes in about that deep, and this right here is the part number. I'll leave this linked in the description so you can easily find it. That way you can install OEM parts. So all we have to do is hammer the old seal out and push the new seal in. But before we do that, when we remove this old seal, if you don't drain the fluid, it's gonna come pouring out. So first let's drain the transmission fluid. Now to drain a manual transmission, there's usually a drain bolt and a fill bolt on the side. So let's head over to the side of the transmission, and right there's the transmission drain bolt, and right here is the transmission fill bolt, and you always want to remove the fill bolt first. So let's break this free, and then we could remove it the rest of the way by hand. Good, and make sure you don't lose that washer. Now let's slide the drain pan under the drain bolt, that way we don't make a mess. And this drain bolt uses the square end of a 3/8 ratchet, so let's get that in there, and let's break this free. Good, and with that loose, now you can remove it the rest of the way by hand. Perfect, and judging by how dark this fluid is, I bet it's been in here for a long time. So this is your reminder to replace your manual transmission fluid. Alright, so let it drain all the way, and once it's completely empty, let's screw the drain bolt back in, clean up any drips, and torque it to spec, and for this car, that's 29 foot-pounds. Good, so with the transmission drained, now let's replace the seal. Now this seal is pressed in, And to remove it, you could use a little pry bar like this and just pry around the edges and push it out. You could also use your punch from before and punch the edges. That way it slowly works its way out. Or you could grab your pliers like these. These are locking pliers. We could get them right around the edge here. And now grab our hammer and hammer this out. Beautiful. And now this should slide right off the shaft like so. Now we want to clean off the rust and roughness on this shaft, and to do that we're going to be using 1500 grit sandpaper. It's rough enough to clean the rust, but not too rough to remove too much material. But we don't want this giant piece of sandpaper. So I cut this small thin piece like that, and we'll wrap it around and we'll sand that smooth. You can see all the pitting and corrosion on here. We want to get that nice and smooth so it doesn't damage the new seal. So the technique is to get the sandpaper and wrap it around the shaft and work it back and forth like this. The key here is to sand it just enough to remove the corrosion, but don't sand it too much where you remove too much material and the seal won't have a tight fit anymore. Okay, and this is looking pretty good, so let's shoot some compressed air back there into the cavity to remove any dirt that might have gotten back there from sanding, and then let's wipe down the area to clean it up. Now, if you rub your fingernail across the surface, it feels pretty smooth. That way our new seal won't get damaged. All right, and now we are ready to drive in our new seal. And I'm gonna be using this 18mm deep socket. It fits right on the inside, right on that hardened lip. That's a hardened steel lip. That's what you want to hit against. You don't want to hit on the outside of this lip. So let's get the new seal on the shaft, and then we can use the socket to push it in by hand and get it started. Make sure it's not cocked to the side, and then with it pushed in as straight as possible, hammer it in the rest of the way. You don't need to use a lot of force, and you can see it start to drive in already. And then once you hear that pitch change, that means it's bottomed out. So stop hammering because you don't want to damage the seal. And if you remember from before, we used these pliers to grab onto the old seal, and it fit between the seal and the transmission just like that. So this just helps me verify that we hammered it in to the correct depth and the seal is completely seated. So now let's fill the transmission with fluid. Now if we take a look in the back of the owner's manual, it says to use 10W30 or 10W40 motor oil in the transmission. And while technically this 10W30 would work just fine in the transmission, it doesn't have any additives for the synchros, but that's why I'm using Honda manual transmission fluid. This stuff came out in the late 90s, early 2000s after this car was built, so it's an upgraded fluid and it'll work much better because it has additives for the synchros. So this is what we're gonna add. And although we unscrewed the bolt from the bottom, it's actually a lot easier to fill up the transmission from the top. If we take a look down here, you can see right there is the transmission fill hole. So to fill it with fluid, grab a long flexible funnel like this one, and then we're just gonna get this right down here next to the engine. And I really like this funnel. It's flexible yet sturdy. That way we could put it into the fill hole without kinking it. So feed it in there, and now we could add our transmission fluid. The manual does say it takes 2 quarts, so that's 1. And let's add the second one. And as we come to the end of our second bottle, let's go take a look down by the fill hole, because once fluid starts dripping out, and just like that, you know it's full. Okay, so now we could remove the funnel, then we could screw the drain bolt back in, and you want to make sure that washer is still on there. So tighten it by hand, and then torque it to spec, which is 33 foot-pounds. Good, and finally let's clean up this spilled fluid so we could identify any potential future leaks. So with our transmission full of fluid, I don't see any leaks at all, which is awesome. So one last thing we need to do under this car is remove all this rust and prevent it from coming back, because look at how crusty this is. That's pretty bad. And to clean up the rust, here's everything you're gonna need. Very important, you need a full face respirator and P100 filters, because we're gonna create a lot of dust and we're gonna spray paint in a relatively enclosed area underneath the vehicle. You do not wanna breathe that in, so wear your mask. Tool-wise, we have a flathead screwdriver, scraper, 180 grit sandpaper, and an angle grinder with a wire wheel attachment. That'll remove most of the rust. Then we're gonna go in and clean with acetone, or you could use alcohol. And then finally, after everything's clean, we're gonna spray paint. And it's very important that you use a spray paint designed for painting over rust. This is called a rust encapsulator spray paint. You're never gonna be able to remove all the rust, so using a spray paint that goes over rust is important, because this has epoxy in it, which will block the oxygen from getting to the metal of the car, which is what creates rust in the first place. So I'll be sure to include all these tools and products down in the description so you can easily find it. Now let's go under the car and remove the rust. Now before we begin cleaning up any rust, the first thing you need to do is grab a screwdriver like this, and you're basically going to stab the sheet metal to make sure the screwdriver won't go through. If it goes through, that means you need to do a rust repair, because the rust is so bad that the metal is weak. And don't worry if that happens, I have a video on how to do that, and I'll link that video so you can easily find it. But but in this case, we're good to go. So next what you want to do is grab a scraper and remove all the loose surface rust. I have a plastic scraper, but a metal one could be used as well if you want to be a little more aggressive. And basically all you need to do is scrape every inch of the surface. If there's any loose bubbling rust, it needs to be removed. And right here is the perfect example. You can see how just by scraping this, all this loose, crumbly rust comes right off, and that's what we want. Okay, so once we finish scraping up all those loose chunks of rust, now let's tape up any holes into the interior, like this giant hole at the shifter. So we're just gonna grab some tape and cover the hole to seal it off, because we don't want any rust or any paint getting into the cabin of the car. Good. Next, we could get our wire wheel, and we want to sand as much of the rust away as possible. Now, this is where you're never going to get all the rust. You'll get a lot of it, and you'll make it look a lot better, but there'll always be some rust there, and that's okay because we're using a special rust encapsulating paint. But you definitely want to try to get down to shiny bare metal as much as possible. And I think you could see why I said you have to wear a respirator, because look at how much dust there is. Good, after you're done with the wire wheel, next grab 180 grit sandpaper, and we're going to scuff up all the metal. That way the paint has a rough surface to mechanically adhere to. Now with the rough surface, we could wipe it down with some acetone, and we're basically trying to remove all the dust and any grease from being underneath the car, because dust and grease will prevent the paint from sticking. Good, and now it's finally time to paint. And again, it's important that you use a paint that's designed to work with rust. And we're going to start at the bottom here and spray from side to side and work our way up. And as you're doing this, you want to overlap each spray about 50% to make sure there's full coverage. And for this first coat, you're just going to have a light coat of paint, so it's not going to be perfect. For our second coat, we're going to put it on a little bit heavier to make sure we cover everything. But for now, just try to get into all the nooks and crannies. Try to spray at different angles and different directions. That way you get the best coverage possible. Alright, now this is looking pretty good, and the instructions say to let this dry for an hour. And an hour later, we are back and ready to spray our second coat. For this coat, we want complete coverage. So what I like to do is spray a light coat, and once you finish that, immediately go back over that same area again one more time, and this is going to create a thicker coat without any of the drips. And again, you want to try to spray at different angles, make sure you get into all the nooks and crannies. And this is looking pretty good down here, so let me finish this up, and then the instructions on the can say let this dry for 24 hours. Now, as we let that dry, let's go and rebuild our shifter. And the first thing we need to do is take a look over here, because there is a lot of rust. Now, you can see the shifter ball and socket is really rusty in here. I mean, this whole thing is just crumbling apart. Rust means material is lost, and there's going to be extra play, and that is what we're trying to avoid. Also, this rod over here that the bushing goes through looks like it's bad. So let's remove the bushing off the rod. Oof, that's not good. Okay, and if you take a look, this is really rusty, and we're going to have to sand this down to make it smooth for the new bushing. Now, the problem is going to be if we sand the rust off of this to make it smooth, it's going to remove a significant amount of material, and then when we install our new bushing, there's going to be a lot more play in here, and any play in here is going to transfer to play in the stick shift, so that's not good. You know what that means. It's out with the old, let's vacuum up all the loose rust, and in with the new. Well, almost new. So I got this out of a junkyard Del Sol, and it looks to be almost completely rust free, which is a huge difference. So we're gonna rebuild this instead. Look at the condition, a lot better. Just need some new bushings. I'll teach you how to make this a little bit tighter. We'll install all those parts into our shifter and make it basically a brand new shifter. So let's get started. First, let's remove the old rubber bushing from the end, then unscrew this bolt that holds in the shifter to the linkage, and now the linkage slides right off. Let's get these washers out of the way, we don't need them anymore. And next, let's remove these two bolts here. So break it loose and unscrew it the rest of the way by hand. Same for the other side. And now we can remove this cover plate that we're gonna reuse. And finally, the shifter is free to come right out like that. And I guess this was from a female-owned Del Sol. Oh yeah, and let's get this rubber boot off the top as well. Okay, so this is the OEM Del Sol shifter, and right here is a plastic cage with a rubber boot. Now this plastic cage will wear out over time, and it makes the shifter feel loose, so we're definitely going to be installing a new one. Alright, so our junkyard shifter assembly has been disassembled, and this is much better than the one off my Del Sol. There is a little bit of rust right here, but it's nothing we can't sand down and paint. But just check out this difference. This was the rust bucket that came out of my Del Sol, and unfortunately it's just too far gone to make it work. That's why there's junkyards. One man's junk is another man's treasure. Let's go get this cleaned up, get a little bit of paint on it, install our new shift components and bushings, and get it back in the car so we could go for a ride. But first, the other end of the shifter is actually in pretty decent shape and moves smoothly. Same with this joint right here. These move smoothly, which is great, but there is room for improvement because I did notice there's a little play in this. And if you take a look right there, you'll notice all the play that's in here. It's not a lot, but it is amplified because of how long the shift linkages are. So we're gonna try to get rid of that play by hammering down on this. But we don't wanna bind it up. We still want it to be smooth. We just don't want it to have as much play. Now, unfortunately, these joints are riveted in. See, there's a rivet there and a rivet here. You can drill them out and add a bolt and tighten them down, but those bolts could loosen over time. It's also a lot of work, so let me show you a little trick with these. So you wanna grab a hard metal surface like this vise, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna place this rivet on that hard flat surface, and we're gonna hammer on the top rivet, and that's gonna squish this together. It's gonna close this gap just a little bit. And you can see there's that little space around the edge of the rivet. We wanna tighten that up by hammering it down. All right, now that is much better. And while it's not much, the head of the rivet is mushroomed downwards from us hammering on it, and that little difference gives it a lot less play. It's still smooth, it's not binding up at all, but we did remove most of that side-to-side play. This feels really firm. Now let's do the same thing to the other joint. So it's still smooth and moves back and forth, no problem. But there is no side-to-side play. Beautiful. So now with this nice and tight, let's go rebuild our shifter. And before installing the new parts, let's make this look brand new. So now the shift linkage looks brand new, let's make it feel brand new. So it's out with the old rusty parts and in with the brand new ones. Now when you're rebuilding a shifter, no matter what car you have, you want to use high quality parts because you're going to feel it. Especially when you're picking your actual stick shift. This is very important. While these all look the same online through the pictures, there are big differences. Let me show you. Now these 4 aftermarket shifters all look the same and they're all made for my Honda, but only one is actually good, the rest are junk. Here's the OEM shifter we removed from the Del Sol, and the diameter of this ball is 35 millimeters. Now if we check the blue $15 shifter from one company, it's 33 millimeters. The black $15 shifter from another company, also 33 millimeters. The blue $25 shifter from yet another company, 33 millimeters. And finally, the silver $100 shifter is 35 millimeters, same as OEM, and this is the only usable shifter from this entire group. And the reason why this is a big problem is because the shifter sits in this plastic cage, which acts like a socket in the shift linkage. So any play in this, you're gonna feel. Now this is the OEM stick shift, and you can see it's pretty tight. Now let's take a look at how loose it is on an aftermarket shifter, and holy smokes, look at that. There is so much play. It's only 2 millimeters, but there is so much play, and that's gonna make it feel even worse than the stock shifter we removed. And then if we put this on the well-engineered stick shift, you could see nice and tight. You get what you pay for in this situation. So now let me show you how to rebuild and install this shifter in your car. And the first thing we need to do is install the plastic cage and rubber boot on the shifter. So let's get this plastic cage in the boot, and this is definitely a tight squeeze, but it will fit. So work it all the way in there. Good, and it should look something like this when you're done. Now we want to add lubrication and make sure you use silicone grease. If you use petroleum-based grease, it'll break down the plastic and rubber quicker over time. And with that lubricated, let's install it on the shifter. And the trick here is to go from the bottom, not from the top. And now comes the tricky part, because this is a really tight squeeze. And what I find works well is using a mini pry bar and just work that in there, and that'll help you hold one side of the boot as you use your fingers to stretch the other side. Good, and now the boot and cage can slide over the ball of the shifter. Perfect. Now we're ready to install the shifter into the shift linkage. Then we can get that cover plate back on, which holds the boot and cage in place. And I'm using some nice new zinc coated hardware to hold this in. Then we could get a washer on the front, add some medium strength thread locker, and then hand tighten the nut on there. Let's do the same exact thing to the other side as well. Then we could tighten down both of these fasteners so they're snug, and that's one, and then that's the other. Good, now we can install this poly bushing, but first let's get some silicone grease on the metal. That way this not only slides on smoothly, but it doesn't squeak after you install it. Now the last thing to install is this rubber piece, which slides over the shifter and sits on here. But as you can see, this rubber is really dry. So a little trick I have to bring rubber parts back to life is using this protectant spray. Just spray it onto the rubber to make sure to coat the entire thing front and back, then use a brush to work the chemicals into the rubber. And after you let it soak for a few minutes, you could wipe away any excess liquid. And this will keep that rubber looking good and protected for a long time. Now we could install it onto the shifter so it snaps in place. Good. Next we could get the lower shift linkage onto the shifter. And the new shifter comes with these 2 inserts that need to get installed. And these prevent the bearing in the shifter from binding up. So one goes on this side and the other goes on the other side. And now the linkage could be installed onto the shifter. Then we could slide the bolt in, get the washer on, and tighten the nylon nut on by hand. Normally I would add thread locker, but since this is a nylon locking nut, you don't need to. So tighten it down and snug it up. Alright, and that is a completely rebuilt shifter, and just so you can remember where we started from, this is the original Del Sol loosey-goosey rusted to bits shifter, and this is basically our brand new rebuilt shifter. And we have one thing left we need to do before we could install this, and that's replace this bushing. Now the stock rubber bushing is a one-piece design. Our aftermarket poly bushing is a two-piece design. So to remove the bushing, first push out the center metal race, and this is what it looks like. Then you want to use a small pry bar and get in between the bushing and the metal and carefully pry the bushing out. And this should come out the rest of the way by hand. Good. Then we want to lubricate the inside with some silicone paste, and now we can install the poly bushing one side at a time. Now these are really tight fitting, so it's important that you get them squared up before pushing them in or it won't fit. Same thing for the bottom, get it squared up and then push it in. And finally, you want to add a little silicone to the metal race, and let's get that pushed in as well. This is a really tight fit, so it's going to take some force. Good. So with our bushing installed, we are completely done rebuilding the entire shifter linkage and shifter. I cannot wait to go for a test drive in this car, so let's go back under the car and reinstall it. Actually, first let's go in the car and remove this tape. And now we could go under the car and just check out how amazing this paint came out. Just so you can remember, here's a before and after. What a difference. So let's get our shifter assembly back under the car, and you want to be careful because everything is all freshly painted, and it would be a shame if we nicked the paint. So carefully work your shifter up into the trans tunnel. Perfect. Now we can get the bushing bracket installed, and that just slides over the bushing. Next we have these old rusty bolts, which I'm not reinstalling. Instead, I'm going to replace it with some nice new hardware. So get some medium strength thread locker on these. That way, all the vibrations down here won't loosen it up. And now we need to line it up like so, and then we could hand tighten one side, then get the other side lined up and hand tighten that side. And finally, you want to torque these to spec, which in this case is 16 foot-pounds. Perfect. Now the shifter's mounted securely to the car, so let's head to the front of the car and mount the other side of the shift linkage to the transmission. So let's get our freshly painted mount in place, and I'm using new hardware with thread locker on these threads, so tighten the bottom one down by hand, and then get the top one tightened down as well. Then you want to just tighten them down with a ratchet, that way they're both snug, and torque them to spec, which for this is 33 foot-pounds. Next we want to add some silicone grease to the ears of the mount, and then we want to slide the poly bushing into the mount, which is a lot easier said than done. This is a really tight fit, so I'm going to tap it with a hammer to get it in place. And it's good that this is tight because it's going to make the shifter feel so much tighter. Now we can get thread locker on our bolt, slide it into place, and torque the spec, which for this is also 33 foot-pounds. Good. Next, I'm going to add some silicone grease to the shift selector shaft. That way it prevents any future rust. Then we could get the dust boot on here, and this just hooks to the lip of the seal that we installed. Like that. And now we can slide the shift linkage on here, and you just want to make sure the holes are lined up like so. And now technically you're supposed to replace this spring pin, but this one's in good shape, so I'm just going to reinstall it. So drive it in with the same tools you used to remove it. Good, and you want to make sure that it's flush with the surface like that. Now let's install the retaining clip. And you can see there's a little notch in this clip. That notch has to go into the spring pin hole. So snap the retaining clip on the shaft, and then spin it so the notch fits into the hole like that. Good, and that's nice and secure. And finally, let's get the dust boot stretched over this so it's covered, and we are done. Alright, so we're finished under the car, so let's head up into the cabin of the car and reinstall the interior. First, let's get the rubber boot installed on here, that way the road noise and any fumes and hot air stay out of the car, and that just snaps into place around the lip. And then we have another boot which is even thicker for more insulation, and that slides over the top like that. So with that all done, let's go and install our center console. But before we do that, you can see it is a mess in here, so let's clean this up real quick. And the trick to vacuuming is to use a brush to loosen up any dust and dirt, and that gives you a better clean. Now we could grab some soapy water and spray the area down. Then we could use a brush to agitate that stubborn dirt, and then finally wipe it all down with a microfiber towel. So with that all cleaned up, looking really good, the last thing we need to do is replace this old, crusty, torn leather shift boot with a nice brand new OEM leather shift boot. So to remove this shift boot, just flip it over, and there's two screws right here. So grab a Phillips head screwdriver and unscrew and remove both of these screws. So it's out with the old and in with the new. Ah, you gotta be kidding me here. So unfortunately, if you take a look, these two are definitely not the same. They're close, but they're not the same, so it doesn't fit. Even though online it said this would fit. But what's new, right? Anytime you're working on cars, stuff like this happens. You just gotta be a little creative, so I have an idea. So that idea is to remove the new leather from the bracket and transplant it onto the old bracket. And you can see the leather is hooked in by these little tabs. So let's just unhook the leather from the tabs, being careful not to tear it. And with all the tabs unhooked, the leather comes right off the bracket. Now let's do the same thing with the old bracket. Just unhook the old worn leather from the tabs, and now it's out with the old torn crusty leather and in with the new, and let's see if we could get this to fit. And that actually looks pretty close. We might be able to pull this one off. So hook the leather around the tab, and I'm going to crimp the tab down just to hold it in a little bit better. Good, but now we have a problem. The slits in the leather don't line up with the tabs. So what I'm going to try to do here is slide the leather underneath the tab, push it in like that, then crimp down the tab. That way it's going to hold the leather in place. Perfect, and that's not going anywhere. So let's work our way around the entire shift boot, securing the leather to the bracket. Alright, even though the brackets weren't the same, we still made this work. So now let's get our brand new shift boot installed into our center console. And all we need to do now is just tighten down the 2 screws to hold it in place. So with those 2 screwed in, our boot is secured, and check this out. This looks so good. I'm looking around the edge here. I don't see any silver from the bracket, so we did a perfect job making this fit. Now let's go get this installed and go for a ride. I cannot wait. So let's get the center console off to the side here. That way I could connect the kill switch. And the order of these wires doesn't matter. Just make sure each one is connected nice and tight. So get these pushed completely together, and then we want to reinstall the protective sheathing on the wire. That way they won't get damaged. And now let's get this center console in place, and you kind of want to just work it in there until it fits. So get the shifter boot over the shifter. Good. Then we can install the back part of the center console as well, and that kind of just fits into place. Now let's screw on our shift knob all the way. And then finally, I'm going to tighten that single screw on the side to hold it in. I still need to replace the carpets in this car, so this one screw will do for now. So with everything installed, now let's get this car back on the ground so we could go for a test drive. So lift the car up and remove each of the jack stands. Now we can lower the car to the ground, remove the wheel chock, and let's get her off the ramps. Holy smokes, what a difference a rebuilt shifter makes. Real quick, just so you remember the difference, this is before we rebuilt the shifter. You can see how loose every gear is. The shifter's sloppy and indirect, and it's very easy to miss a gear. And this right here is after we rebuilt the shifter. So that's neutral, that's first. Look at that, look at how tight that is. Look at how crisp these shifts are. It feels so good. It's direct and it feels absolutely amazing. I wish I did this sooner. So now let's see the measured difference before and after. So this was before with the original worn out shifter, and we had 3 inches or 8 centimeters of play, and the shifter was very loose. And this is the after with our rebuilt shifter. We're in 4th gear, and if we move this back and forth, you can see we have less than 1 inch or 2 centimeters of play, which is a huge difference. And check out this awesome visual comparison in 4th gear. I think this speaks for itself. So there you go, we're 1 step closer to turbocharging this car. Now our shifter is good to go, that way we don't miss any shifts under boost, which could be catastrophic. And I hope this video was helpful. If it was, remember to give it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, definitely hit that subscribe button to see more of the Project Del Sol. And as always, all the tools and products I used in this video are linked down in the description so you can easily find it.